Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the conversation series. I'm thrilled today to have Heidi Bahnck here with me. Heidi is an Emmy-winning video editor. She's an arts and literacy advocate as well. She's worked with NFL films for 19 years, but she's also worked with Nickelodeon and a bunch of other really great projects. And so I'm thrilled to have her here and have her expertise here. But I'm gonna turn it over to Heidi and let her introduce herself further.
Oh, well, that was a pretty good introduction with the basics. Yeah, so I'm Heidi Bahnck. I'm a senior video editor at NFL Films, where I've been for 19 years. But as you said, I've been working in TV production for 26 years. And prior to my work with NFL Films, I did work on an animated children's series at Nickelodeon. I've worked on home makeover series on HGTV. I've worked on other documentary series. So I did have kind of like a bit of a career, not in football TV, even though that's been my job recently. And as you said, I'm also an arts and literacy advocate. And by that, I mean, now that I am mid-career and kind of established in my career, I really got this sense of wanting to find a way to give back, and particularly in my local community. And so I've recently joined my township's arts advisory board, which helps to support and promote the arts in my local town, and I'm really enjoying that. And I also recently joined the board of directors for Book Smiles, which is a nonprofit that helps to put books into the hands of children who need them most. So kids mainly from underprivileged, underfunded school districts. And that's extremely rewarding. I'm pretty new to the board, so it's also a huge learning curve for me. Board service is great, but it's also a learning curve. Like, it's not something I've ever done before. So they're being patient with me, but I love the mission. I strongly believe in the mission, and I'm excited to be involved in that as well.
I want to hit on something that you just said before we dive into your story of how you became to be doing what you're doing. But 19 years you've been with NFL Films. Before that, the years previous, you had not been in sports at all. What was the get like? How did you get into sports? Was that always the goal, or was it just a
No.
job that was so appealing to you?
So yeah, so it's kind of interesting when I talk to students, especially about my career. I like to talk about how it is not a straight path, how it
Yeah.
is totally a winding road, and it kind of ended up in a place where I never thought it was going to end up. So I went to film school. I went to NYU Tisch School of the Arts, and I have a BFA in film and television. And I always knew I wanted to work in TV production. And throughout film school, I came to realize that I wanted to remain on the East Coast. I had this awesome internship when I was in college that put me in LA for a summer, and I got to work at a couple of different
Yeah.
places in LA, and it was awesome, and it was a great experience. And I totally realized that I am an East Coast girl and not an LA person. And so I decided I wanted to build my career on this coast. And what's interesting, not to get off onto a tangent, but what's interesting is now that after COVID happened, it's almost like geography
Yeah.
matters less than ever,
Yes.
where you're working. But anyway, at the time I was like, no, I want to work on the East Coast. And when I got out of film school, I ended up working with a documentary producer, an independent documentary producer, whom I had interned with when I was in college. So I actually did get my first job out of college through a contact that I knew from an internship, which is amazing. But I was just an office PA. It was like a entry level out of school job. I was an office PA. And that was a great experience, but it only lasted for about 6 months. And then I was looking for another job. And I turned to my college's career office and
Yeah.
was looking at postings and saw that there was a series, an animated children's series called Little Bill, that was staffing up at Nickelodeon. And I forget how exactly how this happened, but I realized that a former professor of mine was actually consulting with that series on how to staff it up and how to do production. And so I kind of asked him, who should I contact? Kind of use that contact of my former professor to contact the people who were hiring. And that is how I ended up working on the animated children's series Little Bill, which was on Nick Jr. I worked on that show for about 3.5 years. It was based on the series of books by Bill Cosby before we all knew what kind of a person he turned out to be.
Yeah.
But But the series itself, I'm very proud of. I actually worked with a lot of folks who had formerly worked on Blue's Clues, which of course was a huge phenomenon at Nick Jr. at the time. And that was a wonderful experience. I worked as an animation coordinator, and I ultimately worked as a post-production supervisor on that show. And I loved it because when I was in college, I've always had an interest in animation. And so when I was in college, I mentioned I had an animation professor. In addition to my normal film and television courses, I also took animation courses. And so this was great. I didn't really want to be an animator, but I liked that world.
Yeah.
And so that was a wonderful experience. I worked with some fantastic, very talented animators and designers, some of whom I still keep in touch with, and they are awesome. And but that job finally ended. And I decided I wanted to, that was all in New York. And I decided I really wanted to find work in the greater Philadelphia area, which is where I'm from and where I currently live. And so I did. I started looking for work around this area, and I ended up finding work at a local production company, working on a home makeover series on HGTV. And this was the time that there was a series called Trading Spaces that was
Yeah.
huge on HGTV. And so the spinoff of that was all of these home makeover series.
Oh yeah.
And the one that I ended up working on was around for a few seasons, and it was about organization, like home organization, you know. And that job was actually a terrible fit for me.
Okay. Okay.
I was an associate producer on the show, and I had to like book people to be on the show, and I had to field produce, and the office environment was pretty toxic. And just, I came from working with a wonderful group of people at Nickelodeon and landed with a really toxic office environment and really unsupportive office environment. And so when that series didn't immediately get picked up for a second season, they laid me off.
Yeah.
And I'd only been there for a little over a year, and I almost did the dance of joy out the door. I was so happy. I was like, this job is the best way out of the worst job ever, you know, because I could collect unemployment while I looked for another
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
Um, I will stop here very briefly and say, though that office and that work environment was toxic, some of the people I worked with were wonderful. And once again, I remain in contact with some of the
Yeah.
wonderful people that I worked with. So even though that was the worst job ever,
Yeah.
there are still some great people there. But anyway, I started collecting unemployment and started looking for work. And the short version of that is I was unemployed for 11 months.
Okay.
And I was seriously considering, do I even want to remain in TV production? Like, this is tough. I was applying for jobs, but like, if I learned one thing from that horrible job, it was I knew how to set boundaries now in what I was willing to accept from an employer and what I was not willing to accept from an employer.
Okay.
And so even though I was finding job postings and I was applying and I was getting interviews, I was not just accepting any old job that came my way, because if there was a red flag, I decided to listen to my gut. And that's hard because sometimes you just need a job. You know,
Yes.
you just need a job. You got to pay your bills and you need a job. But I also was really reluctant to get myself back into something that was truly terrible. So this stretches on for months. And meanwhile, you know, I'm from South Jersey, and NFL Films is based in South Jersey. And I I'm saying this out loud. I'm not really a football fan. Despite my employer of almost 20 years,
Yeah.
I'm not really a football fan. I you know, I enjoy a good football game. I certainly know more about the game than I've ever thought I would, and I have a healthy respect for the game and for professional
Yes.
athletes. But I have never considered myself a sports fan at all, really, of
Okay.
any sports.
Okay.
And so, but I knew NFL Films was local, and I was like, you know what? I didn't know anybody there, but I was like, what? I should reach out and find out if there's any opportunity at NFL Films. So I did what they always say you shouldn't do, and I completely sent my resume in cold. Because I thought, you know, I have nothing to lose. Like, what's going to happen? The worst that will happen is they'll take my resume and go, oh, we don't know her, and crumple it up and throw it away. But the best that could happen is it could lead to a job. Well, time passes, and I get a phone call. And they were hiring for a position in their production management department, which I had no experience in. But I was not going to turn down the opportunity to interview. So I did, and I went in, and the interview was fantastic. It went really, really well. I got an awesome vibe from this place, like the opposite of the bad vibes that I had gotten from
Yeah.
other places. And I felt really good about it. And I followed up afterwards with an email like you're supposed to, and I didn't get that job.
Okay.
And so I was like, okay. And, I tried to take it graciously and I said, please keep me in mind if anything else comes
Yeah.
up. And meanwhile, I'm going, what can my alternate career be? Should I be a florist? Should I be, like trying to figure out what these alternate careers should be. But a
Yeah.
little bit of time passes and they call me again. And they said, you know what, we're interviewing for a facility scheduling coordinator position. Would you like to come in and interview? And I was like, yes, I would. And so I came in and the same thing, had a great vibe, had a really good interview, and I did not get the job. So I
Okay.
was like, all right, 2 times. Same thing. I followed up and I said, please keep my resume and keep me in mind if
Yeah.
anything else comes up. And a little bit later, a few weeks later, I got a third phone call. And in this phone call, he said, I saw your resume and I know you've interviewed with us before, and we're looking for assistant editors. And I see that you have experience working in post, which is true because I supervised
Yeah.
post for Little Bill at Nickelodeon. And he said, I see you have some experience with the software we're using. I had experience because of my animation classes in college and my professional experience. I knew the Adobe suite. Especially After Effects and Photoshop, which as an assistant editor at Films at the time was very important to know. And he
Yes.
said, you have the skills we're looking for. Would you be interested? We can hire you at this rate, as a freelancer. Would you like the job? And I said, yes. Because not only was it more in line with what I wanted to do, I was 11 months unemployed and really needed work. And I was like this, and I had gotten this really good vibe from being there. So that is how I ended up at NFL Films, despite having no experience with football and despite not knowing anyone there.
Yeah.
um so it's kind of crazy how I ended up at NFL Films, but I've been there ever since. And I like to tell people that the funny thing is, before the first interview that I did at NFL Films, I was so ignorant of professional football that I didn't really know when the Super Bowl was. I did a little bit of Googling and I was like, I can't look like a total moron. Like I have to know a little bit, so
Yeah.
I at least got a sense of, okay, so the Super Bowl is usually like the end of January, beginning of February. Okay, all right, I got it. Like, kind of the
Yeah.
cadence of football season. And the irony of that situation is now 19 years later, I have worked at 15 Super Bowls in person. And my entire life revolves around the cadence of football season and when things happen. So yeah, so that is how I ended up at NFL Films.
I'm kind of fangirling over the fact that you just said 15 Super Bowls. I mean, that's incredible.
I am very fortunate. I will tell you this, I don't get to sit in a seat and watch the game. I get to work during the game in a little trailer in
Yep.
a compound in the stadium parking lot,
Yes.
furiously editing the I'm going to Disney World commercial while the game is happening. So so I
Yes.
I have been to 15 Super Bowls. I'm going to my 16th in-person Super Bowl this February in Las Vegas, but I have never actually sat in the stands and watched a game.
Yeah. Well, and we all know that commercial too. We all know whoever wins. We always expect the I'm going to Disney. It is truly a tradition of the NFL too in the Super Bowl.
And I feel very fortunate to be a part of that. I mean, I said I've been to 15 Super Bowls in person, but I've actually worked on 16 I'm going to Disney World commercials because we did the COVID year, we did it remotely. So
Okay.
they shot it on location, but we edited remotely. So I didn't actually go to the game that year. But it is this thing that kind of everybody knows. And I feel really fortunate to be a part of that. Yeah.
You just walked us through essentially 26 years and you're from college to where you are now, but your passion for film and for editing and production, all of these things, was there something in your childhood or something growing up that you had a camera in your hand, or what sparked your passion for all of this?
So that's a great question. Two things I guess I'll say is, and I have no idea if this really has anything to do with my actual career or my artistic tendencies or whatever,
Okay.
but My grandfather on my mother's side of the family, I never knew him. He actually died when my mom was a toddler, so she hardly knew him. But back in like the 30s and 40s, he had an 8 millimeter film camera, and he worked for a newspaper. And as just a thank you to all of the paper boys who would deliver the newspaper, he would treat them all to a trip to New York City, and they would go see the Rockettes, and they would like go do all the touristy stuff in New York City in like the 30s and 40s, and
Yes.
he early 40s because he passed away in the early 40s. But he would bring his 8 millimeter film camera with him and shoot footage of them enjoying New York City. And when I was little, I saw this footage, but it's funny because he actually shot around Washington Square Park, which of course is where NYU is located. And I didn't know that until I went to NYU, and I ended up looking at all of his old footage and saw, oh my God, he actually shot where I ended up going to school. So I would like to think that there's perhaps some artistic tendency in my genes somewhere, perhaps from that grandfather,
Yeah.
perhaps from others, but I just think that that's interesting. But I will say, as a kid, I was always an artistic kid.
Okay.
Um, all kinds of arts, music. I've played the piano since I was 4 years old. I did painting and drawing and all of that. In high school, I took fine arts classes. I sang in the choir. I was in the marching band. I did theater. I did a little bit of broadcasting when I was in high school. So I was always, I wrote. I've always been a writer. So I've always been involved in kind of artistic things. And I also remember just loving movies. I remember the first movie that I saw in a movie theater when I was probably 5 or 6 years old was E.T.
Yes.
And and it remains one of my favorite movies of all time. And what I remember about it is that I didn't want E.T. to die. I was
Yeah.
very nervous about E.T. dying. And I also remember that we took my younger brother, who's 3 years younger than me, and he must have been 2 or 3 at the time. And he completely fell asleep during the movie. But but it stuck with me. The experience of going to the movies stuck with me. And my next memory of actually going to a movie in a theater was fast forward to when I'm 13 years old, and it was the summer of 1989, and Tim Burton's Batman
Oh
was
yeah.
was the big movie of the summer. And you got to remember, at this time there was no like Marvel Cinematic Universe. The only superhero movies we had were like Christopher Reeve as, Superman, which was awesome, but like it wasn't like every summer 15 superhero movies came out, and that really wasn't a thing yet. And so and the only Batman we had was like for the 60s TV series. So when Batman came out in 1989, it was a gigantic blockbuster. And of course, I saw it with my family and I saw it with my friends, and just I could not get enough of it. And it's actually the first movie that I went to by myself.
Okay.
I wanted to see it. I just like kept wanting to see it because it was kind of blowing my mind. And my parents allowed me to go to the movie theater by myself, and I sat there in the theater by myself and just loved it. And I kind of had this experience of feeling very at home in a movie theater. I liked how immersive it was. I liked that you kind of got wrapped up in this world. Everything was dark and you just got completely wrapped up in whatever world you were watching.
Yeah.
And so as I was going through high school, that kind of, yeah, I was also really into like all the nerdy stuff before it was okay to be into the nerdy stuff. So
Yeah.
like, I grew up watching Star Trek reruns with my dad, and I liked Star Wars, and I liked all, the superhero movies. And all of this is not like it is now where it's like kind of cool to like the nerdy stuff.
Yeah.
It was not cool.
Yeah.
It was not cool. But it made me really interested in how did they do that stuff. So
Totally.
my initial foray into thinking about film and TV production was actually coming at it from a special effects angle. Like I was fascinated by special effects. Um, and that's how I kind of really started thinking about going to film school. But then eventually that segued more into just like generalized film and TV production. And when I was in high school trying to decide what I wanted to do, I all of my artistic tendencies and my background in loving film and everything, it just kind of coalesced. And I said, you know what, I have to try this. I have to go to film school and I have to try this.
I don't know about you, but I still love going by myself to a movie. Every once in a while, it's just something about just sitting there with yourself and watching it.
Yeah.
I still love doing it. I did it as a kid too, just like you, but I still love to do it today as I'm an adult, and I'm like, it's something about you in that seat and this giant screen. It just does something.
I agree. Although I have to be honest and say I don't go as often as I used to. I think because like my TV at home's pretty awesome. You know,
Agree. Agree.
the home theater experience has improved drastically in the last, 30 years. So I kind of, save going to the actual theater for special movies.
I want to hop into just editing in general with you, and um what does your editing process look like? How do you function in the editing world? I tend to tell people, I'm like, I get in this groove, and sometimes it doesn't happen all the time. I'm like, I find it, I have 3 hours of it sometimes, and I look up and I'm like, oh, it's midnight, it's time to go to bed.
Yeah. No,
What?
you're talking about flow, and flow is awesome. And so I love editing. I finally landed in the part of production that is absolutely where I belong, because I hate field producing. I hate being on set. There's a lot of hurry up and wait. I don't like directing. I don't like that. I appreciate all of those parts of
Yes.
production, and I love working with very talented people who do those things. But my part, editing, is the part I love, because I really love the puzzle of editing. I really think that, and I work in pretty much documentary storytelling, but I think in any type of editing, it's really where your project comes together
Yes.
with a very unique way of really contributing creatively to the project. And like you were talking about flow, when I love flow is amazing. When you get going, and like you said, you lose track of time. And it's joyful, I think.
It is. I
I
feel
think,
like I'm flying. I feel like I'm flying
yeah.
when I'm doing it.
Yeah, it's joyful. And I think especially like, I like to talk about happy editing accidents, right? Sometimes you're doing something very deliberately and then you do like some sort of accidental edit on the timeline, but it's beautiful and it's
Yeah.
like it works out perfectly. That kind of stuff is really fun. Or when you've edited a piece and the client watches it and they go, "We really love this piece, but we hate the music. Can you change out the music?" And you throw in a new piece of music and miraculously your edits still work. Like that kind of stuff is amazing. I'll say that I've actually cheered out loud, kind of giving myself a pat on the back when something is working really well when I'm
Yes.
editing, which is good. I can do that because my edit room at NFL Films is mostly soundproof, so nobody's going to hear me cheering on myself
Oh,
if I feel like I'm doing a really good job with an edit. It's interesting too. I have a standing desk at work, which is great. It's adjustable, like it'll go up and down.
oh yeah.
Um, it's awesome because ergonomics are super important. I've had carpal tunnel in both my hands,
Oh yeah.
um, which I had surgery for. And I've worked with people who have like chronic neck pain or chronic arm pain from sitting in the chair and being scrunched up and looking at a computer for too long. So we finally got these ergonomic desks, which are adjustable, and that is
Yeah.
fantastic. And I discovered that if I'm just doing whatever work, I can stand. But if
Okay.
I really need to concentrate and I really need to kind of get into that state of flow, I sit. And I don't know why,
I'm the
but I
same
just
way.
find like I need to sit if I really want to like get into the work. And so that's weird, but that's how
Flow.
I am. Yeah.
That's how you flow.
That's
Yeah,
how I
it's funny. I'm the same way. I sit down. Most of the time, it has to be a really good, comfy seat for me. I'm like the couch, great. Good chair, great. But most of the time, it doesn't come at my desk when I'm editing. I'm like, it's just something about it's not comfortable. It's not where the creativity is for me. So I'm like, give me somewhere comfy, and I will
yeah.
sit down and just go to town.
That said, because of my own health issues with
Yeah.
ergonomics and with repetitive stress injury, um, and just knowing that when I'm really involved in something, I scrunch up and I get all tense and like my neck and my shoulders hurt. I've started, this is a tip that I like to tell people. I have started setting alarms on my phone. Um, right now it's set for 3 times a day, and the alarm is labeled water walk stretch. So if I'm working a normal, like let's say a regular 9 to 5 day, that alarm will go off at 11, 1, and 3. And it
Yes.
just reminds me that no matter what I'm doing, get up, walk around, drink some water, stretch a little bit. And it helps because sometimes you just forget, like you're just involved in the work and you forget. And I actually was listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about the effects of sitting too much
Oh yeah.
and had mentioned that it's very beneficial if for every half an hour, I guess for every 25 minutes you work, you should get up and walk around for 5 minutes so
Yes.
that essentially 10 minutes out of every hour you're moving.
Yep.
I don't know if that's really doable all the time, in my work, but I do that 3 times a day alarm. I'm thinking about upping it. Like maybe I could do it once an
Yeah.
hour. You know
Oh
what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like set an alarm for every hour, just remind myself to get up. But it makes a huge difference so that you don't injure yourself
Yes.
sitting at your desk.
My alarms aren't as friendly and say that those as nice things. Mine say get your ass up kind of situation. But I do have some alarms that have the same message of stop sitting down and move your butt.
Move your
But
butt, yeah.
I like it, especially I have a desk that raises up and down too, and it's so nice. A lot of the days, like I'll start the morning standing, and then by the end of the day, my feet are like, all right, plop yourself down. You can sit the rest of the time, but I really do enjoy getting to go up and down and move around a little bit during the day. It's important.
Oh, I think it's essential. And I think everybody's body is different, so it's good to have the option to sit or stand or move around however you need to.
I want to hit on you've hit on your work experience and the projects you've been on, but your time with Nickelodeon, were part of Netflix's Quarterback, which I absolutely loved that once again from a sports fan. As I've gotten older, I've really enjoyed, like you were talking about, the documentary type of shows that have been coming out. You've got a lot of tennis and golf on these docuseries on too. So I really enjoyed Quarterback to give us that inside look. But you've done a lot in documentaries, sports, reality. I just want to hit on your time and what are some of the things that you learned that you have taken with you? Some of the things that you're like, nope, that's not. We've hit on the bad workplaces, but just what are some things that you're like, this was great.
Um, so I mean, I as a creative person and as a creative editor, because I also do work as a finishing or slash online editor as well.
Yep. Yes.
So, but as a creative editor, I think it's really important to put your own creative viewpoint into your work
Okay.
because otherwise you're just a button pusher, right? Otherwise you're just pushing buttons and putting stuff on a timeline. Now, sometimes you need to just be a button pusher. Sometimes the job calls for that, and you're the person that you're working with, whether they're a producer or a director or a client or whomever, wants to sit with you and really wants to have the creative control over the job, and you end up pushing buttons,
Yeah.
and that's fine. In that case, the way to be a good editor, to set yourself apart, I think, from mediocre editors, is to be fast and accurate.
Okay.
Use keyboard shortcuts, have a toolkit of troubleshooting, have a bunch of effects and things that you've got in your back pocket that you've used before, maybe that you can throw in there. But, that's if you're doing sort of the button pushing part of editing. But otherwise, I think it's really important to put your creative touch into whatever you're doing. Put it out there. Now, I say that fully recognizing that the editor is never ever the person, the final say on the project, right? There's always a producer or a director or a client who gets the final say on what the project's going to be. But I really feel strongly that if you don't put your ideas out there, you're just a button pusher. Just know that you need to defer to whoever is ultimately responsible for the project. So that's really important. But yeah, those are two things that I've learned about editing. Put yourself out there and, be fast and be accurate. I don't know if you want me to, do you want me to talk about Quarterback at all?
Yeah, I would like fangirling personally. I would love just to know anything about Quarterback and what that whole process looked like between working with Netflix on that, and just that whole production. Like it was just such a cool thing to see.
It took a lot of people to make Quarterback. And I served a dual function on that show. I was the online finishing editor for the show for all 8 episodes, but I also cut several scenes for the show as well. So I will say that you go into it shooting these 3 quarterbacks, not knowing how their seasons are going to turn out, and we ended up very lucky with one who Patrick Mahomes, who won the Super Bowl, and then Kirk Cousins, who had a great season, and he's kind of like later in his career, and then Marcus Mariota, whose career kind of took a strange turn, and it was really interesting with those sort of contrasting characters, but all very interesting in their own way. But imagine, I mean, we just shoot them all season, 3 characters all season, so that's a lot. The way NFL Films is structured is it's sort of like a little mini movie studio. And our producers edit as well as producing. So we kind of do everything in house. We have the robust producer department. We have the post department that I'm in. We have a color grading department, which is great. They are fantastic creative people. We have a fantastic audio department. We have a graphics department. NFL Films also has the largest football archive in the world. So we have our archival department as well. But basically, we function as a little movie studio. So there were hordes of people in the producer department kind of cutting stuff for this show, even as the season was happening, and constantly trying to find the stories. You know what I mean? How do these quarterbacks sustain their performance through the season? How are their family lives? How do they balance that with their incredible, being a professional athlete? How is that?
Yeah.
So where I came into that is I tend to edit short form stuff creatively.
Okay.
And so they came to me, and I'll give you an example of a scene that I'm actually really proud of. In show 7, there's a scene that talks about, the idea was that Patrick Mahomes has a pregame ritual that he does before every single game. He's very superstitious about it, and giving total credit to our producers and directors in the field and our camera people, they noticed that he was doing these same things before every game. And so they started shooting him doing these same things before every game. So here we have a season's worth of Patrick in all these different stadiums doing the same thing. So producers came to me and they said, we want you to show what his pregame ritual is, and here is all the footage of him doing these same things at every game, which
Yes.
is really, really fun to cut, because I basically got to look through the footage and I thought to myself, how can I illustrate this without it being boring? So I kind of pulled out every editing stop that I knew. I pulled out split screens. I pulled out, like the rapidly cut. I did like a thing of him like throwing a pass, but it was like 7 or 8 different shots of him from the same throwing the pass. I layered sound. He always kisses his wife and says love you, before he goes out and plays, and I was able to split screen that, but then also layer the sound, and talking about cheering myself on when I feel like I've got something right. There's one split screen in that scene that I'm particularly proud of. It's Patrick does like a series of warm-ups before he gets into his uniform, and he stretches and he does, all the stuff on the field. Well, he also does like a little sort of jog on the field. And when the camera people noticed this, they started placing the camera in the same spot on the field before every game. And so I started cutting that and I put it into the split screen, and I realized that I could have Patrick essentially run through the split screen. And when it worked, I just went, oh, oh, that worked. And I felt like in myself that it really worked. But then when I showed the scene to the producers for the first time, and they all went, oh, when that happened, I was like, yes, that's what I mean about like knowing that you've kind of hit it. So I'm really proud of that scene. I thought it turned out really, really well. And I thought it did what the producers asked, which was illustrated, in kind of a more artistic, interesting way, how Patrick leads up to the games that he plays in.
I think those types of split screens, that's the kind of stuff when I'm watching, I'm like, that's what I want to learn to do in editing, because it is so fascinating to me to be able to take such very, very small cuts and be able to rhythmically move that.
Mhm.
I applaud you for like having that skill and being able to do it because it's something I desperately want to learn how to do and I've been trying. But I absolutely when that's the kind of stuff when I'm watching, I'm like, holy shit, that's really cool. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
no, I mean, and I thank you. And but I also I think editing, a lot of editing is about making connections, right? So when I approached that scene, I just had to watch all the footage first and see what we had and like, do we have the same thing at the same angle? And what do we have? And how can I show that he's doing the same thing and wearing different clothes and in different situations, you know? And so, but you know, I think especially in documentary editing, it is about making connections and seeing what you have in the footage and how can you connect that together to tell the story, you know?
Totally.
Another cool thing about that scene, which is unusual for us, we have a wonderful composer who's been writing music for NFL films for a very long time. And though I cut that scene to music, our composer post-scored the entire documentary. And so I had the unique experience of working with our composer to post-score the scene. And it was wonderful because I was able to kind of tell him what I thought the moments were in the scene that I tried to hit. And he came back hitting all of those moments, of course, and actually adding flourishes and things in certain parts that I hadn't thought of that really added to it. And that was a very unique experience getting to work with the composer post scoring that scene.
That's incredible. That would be so cool to see come to life.
Mhm.
And as we're talking about it too, like we've been like just all these little things that all of the departments are doing all of these small things to make something so large come to it's just amazing. And clearly my fascination and my fangirling, it just absolutely like this is the kind of stuff that uh really sparks the creativity for me. I'm like, just being able to sit and watch it, I'm like, you can see the tiny pieces that made it all happen.
Yeah, I'm very lucky too to work with some very talented people. I work with very talented producers and very talented editors and very talented colorists and color grading folks that you know and audio folks. And it really does take an army to make these shows.
But
Another series that I've been working on for a very long time is Hard Knocks.
yes.
Which is our series on HBO. I've been working on Hard Knocks since 2007. I'm actually going to be, they just announced that our in-season Hard Knocks team is going to be the Dolphins this season. So in a few weeks, we'll have our first episode on HBO and Max of Hard Knocks in season with the Dolphins. But I have actually worked on 98 episodes of Hard Knocks since 2007. I will hit my 100th episode of Hard Knocks 2 episodes into Hard Knocks in season. Not that I'm counting. I'm totally counting. But that's a lot of Hard Knocks. But my role on Hard Knocks is as an online or finishing editor. But in that respect, it's very unique because Steve Sable, who of course is the late president of NFL Films, who he founded NFL Films along with his father, Ed Sable. Before Steve passed away, he used to describe Hard Knocks as making the show was like building an airplane mid-flight.
Oh, absolutely.
The airplane takes off, but it's half built, and you got to somehow put it together and land the thing safely. And that is absolutely what Hard Knocks is like. So even though we use an offline online workflow to make Hard Knocks, meaning that producers are cutting stuff and then it comes to me as a finishing editor to put it together and finish it, it's very much a work in progress, literally up until we're done with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's you know, that's something that I'm pretty proud of my my work on that as well. And
I would
also very fortunate to work on it.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of Hard Knocks because once again, I love to be able to see the before a season starts for a sports team, just what in the hell is going on and what they are doing to become prepared for this long season that
Yeah.
essentially is going all the way till February. But also the end season, and so even how I knew about you and your work, Chad Schwarzenberger, who worked on Hard Knocks, the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
Um, I loved getting to ask him. I was like, as a Detroit boy, I was like, what was it like to work on Hard Knocks with Detroit Lions? He was like, it was a dream come true. But I absolutely love Hard Knocks and just getting to see the whole process and inside an NFL team that's way bigger than I think any of us can wrap our minds around sometimes, and just
Yeah.
the different departments and people who work there and everything.
And Hard Knocks, you know, it's funny. I always sort of become a fan of the team that we're featuring on Hard Knocks while we're working on Hard Knocks, because you can't help but care about these characters that you're
Totally,
following, you know.
totally. Yeah.
But Hard Knocks is also, you know, it's a very fast turnaround reality series, but we produce it at the same quality that we would produce a documentary that takes months to produce.
Okay.
And so that's where the challenge lies, and for all of us working on Hard Knocks, and especially for me as a finishing editor, you know, stuff rolls downhill. I'm the last guy to touch the thing. I have to make sure it gets out the door, you know. And part of what I do also is, I already talked about what I love about creative editing, but what I love about online or finishing editing is really making the show perfect, or as perfect as possible,
Okay.
you know? Um, and that might mean just making sure that, you know, we do a lot of stuff in Hard Knocks, like um, protecting information for the team, you know? So we're shooting in their locker rooms, we're shooting in their meeting rooms, they have plays drawn on the walls, we erase all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we have to, because that's proprietary information for the team, and we can't be putting that out there because they don't want all of their secrets out there, and that's
Really?
totally understandable. But man, like, you know, it feels really good to be able to do that, and people watch the show and they have no idea that we've done that, you know. And that's what I mean. That's kind of like a little bit of the magic of television, and that's, I take great pride in kind of doing that sort of seamless work. You know, even if you're doing something, people do this all the time. They shoot a TV and they replace the picture in the TV, right?
Yep. Yep.
Picture replacement. So I worked with an editor actually, who ended up being an unofficial mentor of mine for many years. Who I learned from him. One of the things I learned from him is that in creating something that you want to look perfect and imperceptible, it's all in the imperfection.
Absolutely.
So if we're in Hard Knocks and we're replacing out a shot in a TV for whatever reason, we, you know, you don't just do like a picture in picture, you don't just corner pin it in there. You have to dirty it up. You have to show that TVs have
Yeah.
reflections on it. You got to put a reflection on, you know. So those little details, those little imperfections are really what sells it.
Okay.
And I think that for people who are doing sort of effects or you know, compositing or doing finishing editing that involves this kind of work, I think that's something to keep in mind, that you can really, if it looks too shiny,
Yeah.
people are you're not going to buy it, you know. You're not going to buy it. You got to figure out what the natural imperfections would be and then put those back in, you
Yeah.
know.
I feel
And
like I'm a
it
master.
involves observation. I think it just, you know, you just have to observe. You just have to observe real life and figure out, you know, how to translate that into what you're doing on the screen.
I feel like I'm in a master class right now. I'm literally like a sponge soaking up all this from you right now. But I think once again, I'm very excited for Miami Hard Knocks. My sister is much like you. She's not a big football fan, but she loves Miami's coach, so she's thrilled. But this is I love what you said about the imperfections, because I think a lot of people don't think about that as well. Like your example of a TV, like you think it's just gonna fit perfectly, but at the same time, like my TV's got fingerprints on it, my TV's got smudges. You know what I mean? Like I'm lucky if a dog doesn't come and stick his snout on there one day.
Right.
Uh, but I absolutely love that you called that out though, because I don't think that's a lot of things that's something that a lot of people think of sometimes. Is the details and some of the things that we just think are there and
Yeah,
not.
as an online or finishing editor, I mean, that's where I live. I live in the details. I want to make sure that all of the details of the show are wrapped up and that it looks perfect.
Do you have a little bit of perfectionism in you?
100%. And
Okay.
it's funny because it's something I'm trying to like fight against a little bit, because perfectionism is not necessarily healthy.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Sometimes I describe myself as both a creative and an organized person, which is unusual.
Yeah.
Um, Although I don't think it should be. I mean, you can be both of those things, you know, but perfectionism I think is good when I'm doing my online editing, and not good when I'm doing my creative editing, because I want to be messy and I want to be creative and I want to be experimental and figure things out. So I sort of have to turn off the perfectionism when I'm doing the creative part of it, and then turn it back on when
Very
I'm doing
well.
the finishing part of it, you know?
Yes.
But
You're in good company here. I have that same bone gene in my body. I'm like, that's not how I want it. I'm like, there's
yep.
something there's something missing here. Um, Heidi, my last question for you is just what inspires you?
Oh, that's a really good question. What inspires me? I have been trying for a long time now to seek out things that inspire me on purpose. To really to seek out awe, right?
Okay. Okay.
And so you know, how do I do that? It kind of ties in also with being a creative professional and having to be able to sustain creativity.
Yeah.
So when I talk to students, because I do love to talk to students and I love to talk to young professionals, interns, young filmmakers. And one thing that I make sure to talk to them about is what it's like to be a creative professional. You know, it's like if you are a young person and you're artistic and you play the guitar and you like to write music and you get the urge to write a song on your guitar and you go and you do it and you've written it and you feel great afterwards and that was a nice creative burst that you have. And then like time, days might pass before you do that again. The difference between that and being a creative professional is that you have to be creative every day on demand. It doesn't matter if you slept horribly the night before, or you feel like garbage, or you're in a bad mood, or you're just like tired that day, or whatever. You have to find a way to come into work and to produce something creatively every day. And so that's different than just being sort of creative when you feel like it in your personal life. And so you have to find ways to sustain that creativity. And that's where my whole idea of seeking out awe in the world comes in. Um, I like to, I try to another thing I like to say to people is like there's junk food, right? There's creative junk food. Just as you might eat like bad junk food and put junk food into your body and you know it's not good for your body, but you do it anyway. You can also put junk food into your brain creatively. So I'm not saying that I don't enjoy watching some trashy TV shows sometimes, but I also seek out really good stuff too. I try to watch really, really interesting documentaries. I try to watch interesting films. I try to watch high quality TV shows. And that's fine if you want to zone out watching whatever junky TV that, because you need to relax a little bit. But like, if that's all that you're exposing yourself to, it's like what goes in is going to come out. So, um, I like to try to expose myself to more interesting and higher quality things than that.
Yeah.
I need to, when I'm looking for awe, I go out into nature. It also gets me away from, I find that because I'm in front of computers all day for my work, I do not want to be in front of computers at all when I am at home. And
Yeah.
so getting out into nature does two things. It brings that awe into my life, but it also gets me away from screens, and gets me moving. I go walk my dog in the woods, or I take a walk in the neighborhood with my son or whatever. You got to find a way to kind of get away from the work and inspire yourself. I have a lot of hobbies too. I like to read, I like to write. I like to do needle crafts because I also found that though I get to be a creative person at work, which is, I have to say, being a creative professional is wonderful. I feel very privileged to be able to do it. Like, what kind of awesome, it can be difficult, very difficult, and
What?
it can be stressful,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's very rewarding, awesome work. But that said, at the end of the day, when I'm done making whatever project I'm doing, it kind of lives in the digital ether, right? Like it's not like there's an actual film that I can hold. It's this digital thing. And I found that I wanted to take up some kind of craft or art that was actually physical. And so I learned how to knit. And I love it because it's not only relaxing, but because at the end I have this tangible thing
Yeah.
that I can hold and say, I made this, even though I can say there's a TV show or a commercial I cut or something. I said, I made this. You can't like hold it in your hands. Um, so I also gravitate toward, I guess, physical things that I can do with my hands. Like I like to knit, I like to do cross stitch, I like kind of all of the needle crafts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I guess that's how I sustain myself creatively.
Is there a book or a TV show that you're watching right now to throw out to everybody that they should check out?
Oh, let me think. Well, just for relaxation and for awesome,
Yeah.
delightful purposes, the Great British Baking Show is always just lovely to relax to. It's also good because, there's a lot of like anger and hate and angst in the world. And to be able to just, immerse myself in a delightful tent where people are competing, but they're competing in a really nice way.
Yes.
And they're helping each other, and it's sort of
Yeah.
delightful, and they're making delicious baked goods. Like I just, that's sort of like my relaxing, delightful show that I'm watching right now. But otherwise, I'm kind of in between shows right now. I was a big fan of Ted Lasso.
I know. Oh,
Big fan of Ted Lasso, and I'm so sad that it's over. Although I'm happy, like I'm glad when series wrap it up and it's really good and they don't keep going for no reason. So,
yeah.
3 great seasons of Ted Lasso, I'm very happy with, even though I'm sad I don't get to see those characters anymore.
Oh.
Yeah, but
There's opportunity there for other things to happen. So let's hope
yes,
that something does once the SAG strike gets figured out.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing some good stuff, come back.
Heidi, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today and walking me through your career and your creative mind. And I just appreciate. Like I said, I'm like a sponge sitting here right now, just soaking up everything you've been walking me through. So I just appreciate you taking the time and talking with me today.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been absolutely my pleasure.
Yes, and you guys, if you are not a Hard Knocks watcher, go watch Hard Knocks, go watch Quarterback, go watch any of these things that Heidi has been a part of. It's absolutely fantastic. I've happy that was going through your list of like I've watched this. I'm like, yes, I'm up to date on Heidi's.
That's great. Well, thank you.
Yes, yes. And like I said, Heidi, just thank you for talking with me today.
You're very welcome.
And as always, I will see you guys back here next time. Bye, y'all.